At 64, a man learns that the deepest betrayals are not delivered by enemies, but by the very child he cradled in his arms. My name is Arthur Drake, and this is the story of how I discovered that grief, in the eyes of the greedy, looks an awful lot like opportunity. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. They were about to learn just how costly that miscalculation would be. The morning after the funeral for my wife Eleanor, the world already felt off its axis. The service had been a perfect tribute to her dignified, filled with the scent of 1,000 white roses, and attended by everyone whose lives she had touched. I stood beside her polished mahogany casket, the reflection of the stained glass windows shimmering on its surface. My black Brioni suit felt like armor, and the weight of my late father's gold watch on my wrist was a constant, heavy reminder of the legacy I was meant to protect. I accepted condolences with the quiet grace Eleanor had always admired, a composure drilled into me from my earliest days. My hair, now more silver than black, was neatly combed, and I was aware that even in my 60s, my presence still commanded a certain respect. But as I played the part of the grieving husband, a knot of unease tightened in my gut whenever I looked at my son Sebastian and his wife Jessica. They moved through the mourners like circling vultures, their eyes not filled with sorrow, but with a sharp, calculating glint. Their smiles were too brief, their handshakes too firm. When friends offered their sympathies, Sebastian and Jessica accepted them as if they were the sole inheritors of the loss, as if Eleanor had been their treasure alone to mourn. Such a terrible loss. "Arthur, Mr. Henderson from the golf club murmured, placing a hand on my shoulder. "But at least you have your family to see you through." If only he knew the truth. The reception was held at our estate, the sprawling Georgian mansion Eleanor had fallen in love with 30 years ago when my architectural firm finally took off. The $4 million property was nestled on 12 acres of pristine Connecticut countryside, with manicured gardens I had meticulously designed and rooms filled with antiques we'd spent decades collecting on our travels together. I watched how Sebastian and Jessica moved through our home that day, their hands brushing over furniture, whispering to each other as they took a silent, mental inventory of their future possessions. When I caught Sebastian's gaze across the grand living room, he didn't flinch or look away with any hint of shame. Instead, he raised his chin, a flicker of defiance in his eyes that sent a chill straight through my heart. After the last car pulled away, and silence finally fell upon the house, a profound exhaustion washed over me. The immense weight of my loss, the strain of playing host, and the gnawing dread that had been building all day had left me utterly drained. I had just loosened my tie and was heading for the kitchen to pour a much-needed brandy, when Sebastian's voice, sharp and cold, stopped me in my tracks. "We need to talk, Dad." I turned slowly. He and Jessica were standing there, blocking the doorway to the hall. Sebastian, with his perfectly coiffed hair and a designer suit that looked out of place in our home, a suit I suspected Eleanor had paid for. Jessica stood beside him, her expensive dress clinging to her frame, her expression a mirror of her husband's, a barely veiled, hungry anticipation. "Can't this wait until tomorrow?" I asked, though the rigid set of their shoulders told me the answer. "It's been an excruciatingly long day." "No, it can't wait," Jessica said, taking a step forward. Her voice had a sharp, authoritative edge that made the hairs on my arm stand up. "This is about the estate," Sebastian nodded, and I saw a hardness in his eyes I'd never seen before, a coldness that seemed to look straight past me, as if I were already a ghost in my own home. "We've already spoken to Mom's lawyer. We know about the will." My heart began to hammer against my ribs. "What about it?" Jessica produced a manila folder from her handbag, opening it with a theatrical slowness. Everything is left to Sebastian as the sole heir. The house, the firm's holdings, the investment portfolios, all of it. Over $4 million. I stared at the papers she held out, my mind struggling to process the words. That can't possibly be right. Eleanor would never. What? Sebastian cut in, his voice laced with venom. Would never leave her estate to her only child? The son she actually loved? His words struck me with the force of a physical blow. Sebastian, how can you say something so cruel? Because it's the truth, he spat, warming to his theme now. I could see Jessica beside him, urging him on with a subtle nod. You were never really one of us, Dad. You were just convenient. A handsome accessory for her arm at charity galas. Jessica nodded in agreement. The estate belongs to the Drake bloodline now, not to a man who just married into it. The room began to tilt around me, not from sorrow, but from a surge of pure, crystalline rage that ignited in my chest and spread like fire through my veins. But I refused to let them see it. I kept my voice steady, my tone level. What exactly are you proposing? We're saying you need to be out of this house by tomorrow morning, Jessica announced, a smug smile spreading across her face. And we're not giving you a cent. We own everything now. Sebastian stepped closer, and the cloying scent of his expensive cologne, a gift from Eleanor for his last birthday, filled the air. Don't act so surprised, Dad. You had to know this was coming. Mom always loved me more than you. This house, it was always meant for us. Us? I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. Jessica and me, he clarified. We have plans for this place. Big plans. He gestured expansively at the living room I had designed, the space where I had hosted Eleanor's friends and held family Christmas dinners for decades. We're going to renovate, modernize everything, turn it into something worthy of the Cole name. The Cole name. He had taken his wife's name and now intended to erase mine from the very walls of my home. Jessica brandished another set of papers. We've had a settlement offer drawn up. You can take the furniture from your bedroom and perhaps that old Lexus in the garage. We're being generous, considering you have no legal claim to any of this. I looked from the papers in her hand to the smug, triumphant expressions on their faces. I saw the way they stood in my living room, my home, like conquerors dividing the spoils of war. And in that moment, something inside me shifted, something cold, sharp, and utterly devoid of mercy. Let me see the will, I said quietly. Jessica handed it over with a dismissive flick of her wrist. I scanned the document, my eyes taking in the date, the signatures, the carefully worded clauses that bequeathed everything to my beloved son, Sebastian Cole. It was dated 3 years ago, long before Eleanor's health had begun its slow, heartbreaking decline. This document is what you're basing this claim on? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. It's not a claim, Dad. It's a legal fact, Sebastian said, his tone ringing with triumph. Mom made her choice. Now you have to live with it. I folded the document with deliberate care and handed it back to them. You're right about one thing. A choice was indeed made. The only question is whether you two will be able to live with the consequences. They exchanged a quick, confused glance. I saw the first shadow of uncertainty flicker across Jessica's face. What is that supposed to mean? She demanded. Before I could answer, the doorbell chimed, its clear tone cutting through the tense silence. Through the beveled glass of the front door, I could see the silhouette of Lawrence Gable, Eleanor's attorney, standing on the porch with his briefcase in hand. That's our lawyer, Sebastian whispered to Jessica. He's probably here to make the property transfer official. I opened the door. Lawrence stepped inside, his gray hair perfectly coiffed, his expression professionally neutral. At 62, he had been managing the Drake family's legal affairs for over 20 years, and I knew him to be a man of impeccable integrity. "Arthur," he said, his voice full of sincere sympathy, "I'm so sorry for your loss. Eleanor was a remarkable woman and a cherished client." "Thank you, Lawrence," I replied, then gestured toward Sebastian and Jessica. "I believe you've already spoken with my son and his wife." He gave a slight, unreadable nod. "Yes, we had a brief conversation yesterday. However, there are some additional matters that require our attention." He reached into his briefcase and produced a thick, sealed envelope. "Eleanor left this for you specifically, Arthur, with explicit instructions that it was to be delivered to you personally after the funeral." Sebastian stepped forward, his impatience palpable. "Whatever that is, it changes nothing. We've seen the will." Lawrence's gaze shifted from Sebastian to me. "Arthur, your wife was very clear about the timing of this delivery. She wanted you to review these documents in private before any further discussions took place." I took the envelope from his hand, feeling its substantial weight. It was thick, sealed with a dab of red wax bearing the imprint of Eleanor's signet ring. My name was written across the front in her elegant, familiar script. "What's in there?" Jessica demanded, her voice sharp. I looked at her, then at my son, and I saw the raw greed in their eyes, the absolute certainty that they had already won. And for the first time since Eleanor's diagnosis 6 months ago, a genuine smile touched my lips. "I suppose," I said, breaking the wax seal, "we're all about to find out." As I opened the envelope, it felt as though I was unwrapping Eleanor's final gift to me. Inside was a collection of documents, each one a carefully placed explosive charge set to demolish Sebastian and Jessica's treacherous plans. I kept my expression perfectly neutral as I read, even as my heart began to pound with a fierce, vindicating rhythm. The very first document was a new will, dated just 2 months before Eleanor's passing. It completely superseded the one Jessica was clutching like a winning lottery ticket. But it was more than just a new will. It was a masterpiece of legal foresight, revealing a side of my wife's strategic brilliance I had never fully appreciated. "Well?" Sebastian demanded, his voice tight with impatience. "What is it?" I looked up at him, at the arrogant, entitled expression on his face, at the way he was already mentally measuring the windows for new curtains. "It appears your mother left me a letter." "A letter?" Jessica scoffed. "A sentimental piece of paper isn't going to change any legal realities." I continued reading, and what I discovered next made my breath catch in my throat. Eleanor hadn't just suspected Sebastian and Jessica were planning to betray me. She had known it. The letter meticulously detailed months of their suspicious behavior, of hushed phone calls she had overheard, and of financial discrepancies that had aroused her suspicion. But the true bombshell was the private investigation she had commissioned. An investigator named Peter Vance had been tracking Jessica's activities for nearly a year, uncovering a systematic pattern of embezzlement from my architectural firm. The evidence was all there, laid out in damning detail: forged signatures on checks, diverted client payments, fraudulent supply contracts. It totaled over $200,000. "You're taking an awfully long time with that letter," Sebastian said, moving closer. "What did she say?" I carefully folded the papers and looked at Lawrence. "These are very comprehensive documents." His nod was almost imperceptible. "Your wife was exceedingly thorough in her final preparations." Jessica was becoming agitated. "Look, whatever sentimental nonsense she wrote down doesn't matter. The will is clear." "Which will would that be?" I interrupted softly. The question hung in the air between us like a suspended blade. Sebastian's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Which will? I handed the documents from the envelope to Lawrence. Perhaps you could explain the legal implications of these papers, Mr. Gable. Lawrence adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Certainly, Arthur. Your wife executed a new will on September 15th of this year. It was properly witnessed and notarized, and it legally supersedes all previous testamentary documents. He looked directly at Sebastian. This new will leaves the entire estate, including this house, all financial accounts, and all business interests, to Mr. Arthur Drake. The silence that followed was so profound I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I watched the color drain from Jessica's face and saw Sebastian's mouth open and close, no sound emerging. That's impossible, Jessica finally choked out. We saw the real will. Everything goes to Sebastian. The will you saw was indeed genuine at the time it was written, Lawrence continued, his voice professionally calm. However, it was superseded by your mother-in-law's final testament. In legal terms, the most recent, validly executed, will take precedence over all previous versions. Sebastian finally found his voice. Why would she do that? Why would Mom change her mind? Lawrence consulted another document from the file. According to the letter of instruction she left with me, your mother became deeply concerned about certain financial irregularities that had come to her attention. Financial irregularities? Jessica's voice cracked slightly. Yes. Lawrence's tone remained neutral, but his eyes were sharp as glass. Specifically, evidence of embezzlement from Drake Architecture, totaling approximately $200,000 over the past 18 months. Now it was Jessica who looked as though she might faint. I don't know what you're talking about. The private investigator's report is quite detailed, I said, pulling another sheaf of papers from the stack. Bank records, copies of the forged signatures, a full accounting of the diverted payments. Your wife has been very busy, Sebastian. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw genuine fear in my son's eyes. Dad, there has to be some kind of mistake. The only mistake, I interrupted, standing to my full height and straightening the cuffs of my shirt, was in thinking you could steal from this family and get away with it. Jessica was backing toward the door now. This is all fabricated. You can't prove any of it. I smiled at her. The same cold, confident smile I'd seen Eleanor use in negotiations when she held all the cards. Can't I? Tell me, Jessica, do you remember the Brennan contract? The one where you diverted the materials payment into a secret personal account? Her face went ashen. Or perhaps the Henderson project, where you submitted inflated invoices and pocketed the difference. I was enjoying this now, watching her squirm. My wife may have seemed frail these past few months, but she was acutely aware of what you were doing to her company. Sebastian turned on his wife, his face a mask of confusion and betrayal. Jessica, tell me they're lying. Tell me you didn't steal from my mother's business. But Jessica couldn't meet his eyes. Her guilt was written all over her face in big, bold letters. Your mother gave you so many chances, I continued, my voice growing stronger with every word. She knew about the gambling debts you brought into this marriage. She knew about your failed online ventures, your habit of living far beyond your means. She even overlooked the smaller borrowings from the company accounts. Borrowings? Sebastian's voice rose in disbelief. She was stealing, but what your mother could not overlook. I went on, my gaze fixed on my son. Was your plan to steal from me, to throw me out of my own home and leave me with nothing? That's when she decided enough was enough. Lawrence cleared his throat. There's one more document you should both be aware of. He handed me a final paper. A criminal complaint that your wife filed with the district attorney's office 3 weeks before her death. Jessica made a strangled noise. She wouldn't. She was family. Family? I stood up. And despite being 20 years older than this woman, I felt more powerful than I had in months. Family doesn't steal from one another. Family doesn't plot to leave an elderly widower homeless. Family doesn't count the silverware while the body is still warm. Sebastian was crying now, not tears of grief, but of rage and disbelief. Mom wouldn't have done this to me. She loved me. She did love you, I said, and for a fleeting moment, my voice softened. That's why she gave you so many chances to do the right thing. That's why the criminal complaint was never officially submitted. She kept hoping you would come to your senses. But now? Jessica asked, her voice barely a whisper. I walked to the window and looked out at the gardens Eleanor and I had planted together, at the life we had built on these 12 acres. When I turned back, my expression was like ice. Now, my wife is dead, and you just tried to steal her widower's home. The criminal complaint will be filed tomorrow morning. Dad, please, Sebastian started. Don't, the word came out like a whip crack. Don't call me Dad. A son doesn't do what you did today. A son doesn't look at his father's grief and see it as a business opportunity. Lawrence was gathering his papers. Arthur, I'll need you to come to my office tomorrow to formalize the estate transfer. And I should mention, Eleanor also left specific instructions regarding the criminal charges. What instructions? Jessica demanded. Lawrence's smile was sharp. If anyone attempted to challenge Arthur's inheritance or try to force him from this house, the complete evidence package was to be turned over to the authorities immediately. He glanced at his watch. I believe that threshold has now been met. As they stood there, absorbing the full weight of this revelation, I felt a satisfaction deeper than any I had known in years. Eleanor had protected me, even from beyond the grave, and now these two greedy, heartless people were about to learn what real consequences felt like. You can't do this, Sebastian said, but his voice lacked any conviction. I'm your son, a son I no longer recognize, I replied coldly. The boy I raised would never have done what you did today. He would never have looked at his father's tears and seen dollar signs. Jessica grabbed Sebastian's arm. We need to leave. We need to call our own lawyer. By all means, I said. Though I should warn you, embezzling from a family business while planning inheritance fraud doesn't exactly create a lot of legal wiggle room. As they stumbled toward the door, Sebastian turned back one last time. The mask of entitlement had finally fallen away, and I saw him clearly for what he had become, a stranger wearing my son's face. This isn't over, Dad. I adjusted the watch on my wrist and smiled. Oh, my boy, it's only just beginning. The following morning, I woke in my own bed, in my own house, and for the first time in days, the crushing weight of uncertainty had lifted from my chest. Eleanor's documents were spread across the mahogany desk in my study, each page a testament to her final, brilliant act of love and protection. I had spent hours the night before poring over every detail of the private investigator's report. Peter Vance had been meticulous, photographing bank deposits, documenting Jessica's gambling habits at the Mohegan Sun Casino, and tracing the intricate paper trail of diverted funds. My wife had constructed an airtight case against her own daughter-in-law, and now it was time for me to put it to use. At 9 a.m. sharp, I called Lawrence Gable's office. "Good morning, Arthur," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that had been absent in front of Sebastian and Jessica. "How are you holding up?" "Better than I expected," I replied, surprised by the truth in my own words. "I'm ready to move forward with everything we discussed yesterday." "Excellent. Can you be here at 11? We'll need to file the new will with the probate court, and I'd like to discuss the criminal complaint before we submit it to the district attorney. After hanging up, I took particular care with my appearance. I chose a navy blue canali suit that Eleanor had always said brought out the blue in my eyes, paired with my grandfather's pearl cufflinks and the simple gold wedding band that had been a part of my hand for 37 years. My silver hair was styled perfectly, every strand in place. If I was marching into battle, I would do so looking like the formidable man Eleanor had married. Lawrence's office was situated in the town's historic district, in a restored colonial building that spoke of old money and established legacies. His secretary, Miss Albright, greeted me with the deference due to someone whose family had been clients for over 2 decades. "Mr. Drake, please accept my deepest condolences," she said softly. "Mrs. Drake was such a wonderful woman." "Thank you, my dear. She certainly was." Lawrence's office was lined with leather-bound law books and framed diplomas, his desk orderly with neat stacks of documents. But my attention was drawn to the other man seated across from him, a younger lawyer with sharp eyes and an impeccably tailored suit. "Arthur, I'd like you to meet Daniel Croft, our firm's specialist in criminal law," Lawrence said. Daniel stood and extended his hand. "Mr. Drake, it's an honor. I've reviewed your wife's evidence package. It's truly comprehensive." I settled into the supple leather chair across from them, folding my hands in my lap. "What exactly are we dealing with, legally speaking?" Daniel opened a thick file. "Your daughter-in-law is facing potential charges of felony embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit inheritance fraud. The evidence your wife gathered is substantial. We have bank records, forged documents, and even witness statements from employees at your firm who saw her diverting materials." "And my son?" I asked, the words feeling foreign. Lawrence leaned forward. "Sebastian's involvement is more complex. He wasn't directly involved in the embezzlement, but his participation in yesterday's attempt to defraud you of your inheritance creates significant additional legal exposure for him." "What does that mean in practical terms?" "It means," Daniel said, "that if we file these charges, both of them are looking at serious prison time. Jessica could face 8 to 10 years. Sebastian, as an accessory and conspirator, could face 3 to 5. The numbers hung in the air, heavy and cold. I thought about my son as a little boy, the child who used to trail after me in the garden, telling me he wanted to be an architect just like me when he grew up. Then I thought of his face yesterday, cold, calculating, as he told me I had no claim to my own home. "What are my options?" I asked. Lawrence pulled out another document. "Your wife left very specific instructions on this matter. She wanted the final decision to be entirely yours. We can file the criminal complaint and pursue a full prosecution, or we can use the threat of prosecution as leverage to recover the stolen funds and ensure they never contest your inheritance. And if I choose prosecution, they'll be arrested within 48 hours, Daniel stated. Given the strength of this evidence, a plea bargain would likely be their only viable option. I stood and walked to the window, which overlooked the town square. Below, people were going about their daily lives, shopping for groceries, meeting for coffee, pushing strollers in the park. None of them, I imagined, had just discovered their own son was capable of such breathtaking betrayal. "Mr. Drake," Lawrence prompted gently, "what would you like us to do?" I turned back to face them, and in that moment, I felt Eleanor's strength flowing through me. "File the charges," Daniel nodded. "All of them? Every single one," I confirmed. "And I want you to understand, gentlemen, this decision has nothing to do with money. It has everything to do with character." My son looked at his grieving father and saw an obstacle to be removed. "That tells me everything I need to know about the man he has become." Lawrence was already reaching for his phone. "I'll contact District Attorney Williams immediately. With this level of evidence, They'll move swiftly. As he made the call, Daniel leaned forward. Mr. Drake, I must warn you, this is going to become very public. The media will likely seize on this story. Your family's private affairs will become front-page news. I adjusted my cufflinks and offered a grim smile. Good. Let everyone see what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. The remainder of the meeting was a whirlwind of legal terminology and strategic planning. By the time I left Lawrence's office, the gears of justice were officially turning. The district attorney had agreed to fast-track the case given the clear-cut nature of the evidence, and arrest warrants would be issued within 24 hours. I drove home through the golden autumn countryside, past the covered bridge Eleanor had always adored, past the antique shops where we had spent so many happy Saturday afternoons. Everything looked the same, but I felt fundamentally altered. The grieving widower who had buried his wife 2 days ago was gone, replaced by someone harder, more focused, and utterly without mercy. My phone rang as I pulled into my circular driveway. Sebastian's name flashed on the screen. "Hello, Dad." His voice was strained, artificial. "Jessica and I have been talking, and we think there might be some room for negotiation." "Really?" I kept my voice neutral as I walked into my house. Asterisk, my Times house, legally and completely. We realized yesterday was emotional for everyone. Maybe we can work out some kind of arrangement that's fair to everybody. I almost laughed out loud. Asterisk, fair to everybody. Asterisk. As if there was some moral middle ground between theft and honesty, between betrayal and loyalty. What kind of arrangement did you have in mind? Well, obviously the house should stay in the family. It is staying in the family, I interrupted. My family. Dad, be reasonable. You don't need all this space. We could set you up in a nice condo, maybe give you a monthly allowance. Stop. The word shot out like a bullet. Just stop talking, Sebastian. Silence crackled on the other end of the line. Do you want to know what your mother's last words to me were? I asked, my own voice growing stronger with each word. She said, Arthur, you're stronger than you know. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise. She knew what you were planning, Sebastian. She knew, and it broke her heart. That's not true. Mom loved me. She did love you. That's why she gave you every opportunity to prove her wrong. That's why she waited, hoping you would remember the values we tried so hard to teach you. We can still work this out, he said. But I could hear the desperation creeping into his voice. We stopped being a family the moment you decided I was worth nothing more than the furniture in my bedroom. I hung up and immediately switched off my phone. Let him wonder. Let him worry. Let him spend the night contemplating what he had so carelessly thrown away for money that was never going to be his. That evening I sat in Eleanor's study, surrounded by her books and the warm scent of old paper and leather that always reminded me of her. On her desk was a framed photograph from our wedding day, 2 young people, blissfully unaware of the life that lay ahead, but ready to face it all together. I touched the cool glass gently. I promise you, my love, I whispered to the empty room. They won't get away with this, not for stealing from you, and not for trying to steal from me. Outside, the autumn wind was picking up, rattling the old window panes and stripping the last crimson leaves from the maple trees. But inside, I felt strangely warm and protected, wrapped in the armor of righteous anger and irrefutable legal documentation. Tomorrow, my son and his wife would finally learn that some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. And I would be there to witness every single moment of their overdue reckoning. I was savoring my morning tea on the sun porch when I saw the police cars turning into my long gravel driveway. There were 3 of them, 2 county sheriff's vehicles and an unmarked sedan that I knew carried the lead detective on the case. I carefully set down my china cup and saucer, smoothed the front of my lavender cashmere sweater, and prepared myself to enjoy the show. Sheriff Collins emerged from the lead car, a man I recognized from various town fundraisers. He was in his mid-40s, with the kind of steady, unflappable demeanor that comes from years of handling other people's crises. The detective was a woman, tall and professional, her steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. I opened the front door before they had a chance to ring the bell. "Good morning, Sheriff Collins," I said pleasantly. "I assume you're here about the Drake matter." He touched the brim of his hat respectfully. "Morning, Mr. Drake. This is Detective Russo. We have warrants for the arrest of Jessica Cole and Sebastian Cole. Our understanding is that they're currently staying at this residence." "They were," I corrected him smoothly. "They departed last evening after we had a rather conclusive family discussion, but I believe I can assist you in locating them." I stepped aside, holding the door open. "Please, come in." The officers filed into my grand foyer, their eyes taking in the crystal chandelier, the intricate Persian rugs, and the oil paintings Eleanor and I had collected over the years. This was an environment of old money elegance, and I could see them noting the stark contrast with the sordid details of an embezzlement case. "Mr. Drake," Detective Russo began, "we've reviewed the evidence package your attorney submitted. It's quite substantial. Can you tell us about your relationship with the suspects?" I gestured toward the formal living room. "Please, have a seat. Can I offer you coffee?" "That's kind of you, sir, but we're fine," Sheriff Collins said. "We'd just like to get this resolved as quickly as possible." I settled into my favorite wingback chair, the very one where I'd read bedtime stories to Sebastian 30 years ago, and folded my hands in my lap. "Jessica Cole is my daughter-in-law of 8 years. Sebastian Cole is my son." The words came out steady, matter of fact. Or rather, he was my son. I'm no longer certain I can claim that relationship. Detective Russo consulted her notes. "According to the complaint, they attempted to force you from this house based on what they believed was a valid inheritance claim." "That's correct. Less than 18 hours after my wife's funeral, they informed me that I had no legal right to remain in my own home. They gave me until the following morning to remove my personal effects and leave." The detective's expression hardened. "And this was based on what they believed to be your wife's will? A will that had been superseded by a more recent document?" "Yes. But they weren't interested in hearing about legal technicalities. They were quite certain they owned everything now." I allowed a small, wry smile. The phrase, "we're not giving you a dime," was used on several occasions. Sheriff Collins was writing in his notepad. "Sir, do you know where they might be staying now?" "I believe they're at the Marriott downtown. Jessica made a rather dramatic exit last evening when she realized her legal situation wasn't quite what she had anticipated." I stood and walked to the window. "There's something else you should know, Sheriff. This isn't just about inheritance fraud. My son's wife has been embezzling from my late wife's architectural firm for over a year." "Yes, sir. That's a significant part of our investigation. The evidence package includes bank records, forged signatures, diverted payments." "Over $200,000? I interrupted. "Stolen from a woman who had treated Jessica like a daughter. My wife knew Jessica had financial problems when Sebastian married her. She gave her a job, brought her into the family business, trusted her with the company's finances." Detective Russo leaned forward. "Mr. Drake, I have to ask, why didn't your wife press charges when she first discovered the theft?" I turned back to face her, and I'm certain she could see the pain in my eyes, despite my composed exterior. "Because she loved my son. She kept hoping Jessica would confess, make restitution, and prove that she deserved the immense trust Eleanor had placed in her. But that didn't happen. Instead, they planned to steal my home and leave me destitute." That's when my wife realized that some people mistake mercy for weakness. Just then, my phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID and saw Sebastian's name. "That's him now," I said to the officers. "Would you like me to answer it?" Detective Russo nodded. "Put it on speaker if you would, sir." I pressed the speaker button. "Hello, Sebastian." "Dad." "Thank God. Something terrible is happening." His voice was high-pitched and panicked. "There are police officers here at the hotel. They're saying they have warrants for us. This is all some kind of horrible mistake." "There's no mistake, son," I said calmly. "The district attorney's office has filed charges based on the evidence your mother gathered before she died." "What evidence?" "Dad, you have to help us. You have to call them and tell them this is all a misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," I replied, my voice like chilled steel, "was yours. You misunderstood who you were dealing with when you decided to steal from this family. We didn't steal anything. The inheritance was legally ours." "Based on a fraudulent claim?" "Yes. But that's not the only charge, is it, Sebastian? Ask Jessica about the Brennan contract. Ask her about the Henderson project invoices." The line went quiet, save for some muffled, frantic voices in the background. "Dad, please." Sebastian's voice was now barely a whisper. "We can fix this. We can pay back whatever Jessica took from the company." "With what money?" I asked coolly. "The gambling debts, the credit card bills, the missed mortgage payments on that house you can't afford?" Sheriff Collins signaled that they needed to leave. I nodded. "Sebastian, I have to go now. The officers are here, explaining the charges to me." "Officers? Dad? What officers?" "The ones who are about to arrest you." I ended the call and switched off my phone. Detective Russo stood. "Mr. Drake, we'll need you to come down to the station later today to give a formal statement." "Of course. What time would be convenient?" "How about 2 p.m.? "Perfect. I have a haircut at 11, but I should be finished by then." Sheriff Collins looked slightly surprised. Most people facing a family implosion of this magnitude wouldn't be thinking about grooming, but I had learned long ago that looking the part was half the battle in any conflict. "One more thing," Detective Russo said. "This case is likely to attract media attention. Embezzlement, inheritance, fraud, family drama. It has all the elements reporters love." I walked them to the door, my shoes clicking on the marble foyer. "Detective, I spent 40 years as the husband of a successful, high-profile architect. I've weathered business disputes, zoning scandals, and plenty of social gossip. A little media attention doesn't frighten me." "And your son? How do you think he'll handle the publicity?" I paused with my hand on the doorknob. "My son made his choices when he decided that money was more important than family loyalty. Now he gets to live with the consequences." After they left, I returned to my tea, which had grown cold. I made a fresh cup and sat down with the morning paper. The autumn sun streamed through the tall windows, warming the antique furniture that Eleanor and I had so carefully chosen together. Everything was exactly as it should be. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Jessica. We need to talk. There has to be a way to work this out." I deleted the message without responding. There was nothing to work out, nothing left to negotiate. They had shown me exactly who they were, and I had believed them. An hour later, Lawrence Gable called. "Arthur, I just heard from the DA's office. Both arrests were made without incident. They're being processed now, and bail hearings are scheduled for tomorrow morning." "What kind of bail are we looking at?" "Given the amounts involved and the flight risk assessment, probably $50,000 for Jessica and $25,000 for Sebastian. And if they can't make bail, they'll remain in county lockup until the trial, which, given the strength of our evidence, should be fairly quick." I found myself smiling. How quick? 3 to 4 months. Assuming they don't try to drag it out with motions and delays. But Arthur, I have to ask, are you prepared for what this is going to do to your relationship with your son? I looked around my living room at the family photos that would now need to be updated, at the empty space where Christmas stockings would not be hung this year. Lawrence, I said, my voice firm, my relationship with my son ended the moment he told me I wasn't family anymore. What happens now is simply cleanup. By Wednesday morning, the story had broken in the local newspaper. The headline read, "Local architectural magnate's family faces fraud charges." By Thursday, it had been picked up by the regional papers, and by Friday, a news van was parked across the street from my estate. I had expected this, of course. A story involving a wealthy family, embezzlement, inheritance fraud, and a father pressing charges against his own son was precisely the kind of scandal that sold papers and drove website clicks. What I hadn't expected was how much I would enjoy it. I was in my garden on Friday morning, deadheading the last of the late-season roses, when a young reporter approached my fence. She was pretty, likely fresh out of journalism school, with an eager expression that suggested she believed this story might make her career. "Mr. Drake, I'm Megan Riley from Channel 12 News. I was wondering if you might have a few minutes to comment on the charges against your son and daughter-in-law." I straightened up, pulling off my leather gardening gloves. I was wearing a cream-colored cardigan over a crisp button-down shirt and perfectly pressed khakis. My silver hair was neatly combed, my grandfather's watch catching the morning sunlight. I knew exactly how I looked. Like everyone's ideal grandfather, the kind of man who coached Little League and remembered birthdays. "Of course, my dear, though I should mention that my attorney has advised me to be careful about what I discuss publicly." She fumbled for her phone, activating the recording app. "Can you tell us how you're feeling about all this? It must be incredibly difficult to have family members facing criminal charges." I chose my words with care. "It is difficult, Megan, but perhaps not in the way you might think. What's difficult is realizing that someone you raised from birth, someone you sacrificed for and loved unconditionally, could look at your grief and see an opportunity. What's difficult," I paused, letting the weight of the words sink in, "is learning that the child you would have given anything to is actively planning to leave you with nothing." The reporter's eyes widened. "So? You don't feel conflicted about pressing charges?" "Conflicted?" I considered the word. "No, I don't believe conflicted is the right word. Heartbroken? Yes. Disappointed? Certainly. But conflicted? No." I looked directly into her phone's camera. When someone steals from you, you report it to the police. It shouldn't matter whether they're a stranger or your own child. What about the inheritance dispute? Some people are saying this is really about money. "Let me stop you right there," I said, my voice growing firmer. "This was never about money. My wife left me financially secure, regardless of the inheritance. This is about character. This is about two people who decided that an elderly widower was expendable. Can you tell us about the embezzlement charges against your daughter-in-law?" I can tell you that my wife was a trusting woman who gave her daughter-in-law every opportunity to succeed. She brought Jessica into the family business, taught her the trade, and included her in major decisions. I shook my head sadly. That trust was repaid with theft. Over $200,000 stolen from a woman who had treated Jessica like a daughter. Have they tried to contact you since the arrests? Multiple times. They seem to believe this is all some kind of misunderstanding that can be resolved with the right conversation. I smiled coldly. But there's no misunderstanding. The evidence is clear, the law is clear, and my position is clear. What is your position? That actions have consequences. that family loyalty isn't a one-way street, and that being related to someone doesn't give you the right to steal from them. After the reporter left, I went inside and called Lawrence. "I just gave my first interview," I told him. "Arthur, we discussed this. It's better if you don't." I was very careful, I assured him. I stuck to the facts, remained calm, and I think I came across exactly as I intended. Which was how? Like a grandfather who's been deeply hurt, but who refuses to be a victim. I poured myself a tall glass of iced tea. "Lawrence, these people tried to steal my home. They planned to leave me destitute while they renovated my house with my own money. I'm not going to hide from that truth." That afternoon, the interview aired on the evening news. I watched it from my living room, noting how the camera had captured the quiet dignity of my home, the careful grooming that spoke of a life of substance and good breeding. I looked exactly like what I was, a man of principle who had been grievously wronged by his own family. My phone rang almost immediately. It was Susan Peterson, my neighbor and oldest friend. "Arthur, I just saw you on television. You were magnificent." "Thank you, my dear. I thought it went well. That horrible reporter was trying to make you sound vindictive, but you came across as so dignified, so reasonable." Susan paused. "Have you heard from Sebastian? He's been calling constantly." "I've stopped answering." "Good. Let him stew in his own choices for a while." The doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a delivery truck. "Susan, I need to go. Someone's delivering something." It was flowers. A massive funereal arrangement of white lilies and roses with a card that read, "Dad, please forgive us. We can fix this. All our love, Sebastian and Jessica." I carried the arrangement to my kitchen and dumped it directly into the garbage disposal. Then I called the florist. "This is Arthur Drake. You just delivered flowers to my address, and I need you to know that I will not be accepting any future deliveries from Jessica Cole or Sebastian Cole. Please add them to your do not deliver list." "Sir, are you sure? They were very expensive." "I'm quite sure. And please, call them and inform them that their money was wasted." Over the weekend, more reporters appeared. I gave 2 more interviews, each time presenting myself as the wronged but dignified widower who was simply seeking justice. I mentioned Eleanor frequently, painting her as a loving wife who had tried to protect her family's legacy from those who would exploit it. By Sunday, the story had reached the national news blogs. "Widower presses charges against son in inheritance fraud case" was trending on social media. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive. "Good for him. Family doesn't give you the right to steal. This man has more dignity in his little finger than his son has in his whole body. I hope he takes them for everything they're worth." Monday morning brought a call from my attorney. "Arthur, I've been contacted by a lawyer representing your son and daughter-in-law. They want to discuss a plea agreement." "What kind of plea?" "Full restitution of the embezzled funds, guilty pleas to reduce charges, and a formal public apology." I was quiet for a long moment. "What would the reduced charges carry?" "Probation for Sebastian, maybe 6 months in minimum security for Jessica." "No, Lawrence, Arthur, no. They made their choice when they decided to steal from this family. They made their choice when they told me I was worthless. They don't get to negotiate their way out of the consequences now. The district attorney is pushing for this. It saves the state the cost of a trial. Then the district attorney can explain to the voters why he's letting inheritance fraudsters off with a slap on the wrist." My voice was ice. "I didn't ask for this fight, Lawrence, but now that I'm in it, I'm going to finish it." That afternoon, I received a handwritten letter from Sebastian. It was delivered by a private courier, written on expensive stationery in the careful cursive I had taught him as a child. "Dear Dad, it began. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. Jessica and I made terrible mistakes, and we hurt you in ways that can never be undone. But please, I'm begging you to find it in your heart to forgive us. We can pay back every penny Jessica took from Mom's company. We can make this right if you'll just give us the chance. I'm still your son, no matter what I've done. Please don't let this destroy our family forever." I read the letter twice, then carried it to Eleanor's study. I sat at her desk, pulled out a piece of my own personal stationery, and wrote my response by hand. "Sebastian, you stopped being my son the moment you told me I wasn't family. You destroyed our family when you decided money was more important than love. There is no forgiveness for what you've done, and there will be no mercy. You made your choice. Now live with it. Arthur Drake." I sealed the letter and called the same courier service to deliver it. Then I sat back in Eleanor's leather chair and felt, for the first time since her death, completely at peace. It's important to remember that this strength didn't come from a place of revenge. It came from recognizing my own worth, from understanding that I deserved better. When you face betrayal, true healing begins not with vengeance, but with reclaiming your own value and rebuilding your life on a foundation of self-respect. 3 weeks into October, Lawrence called with an update that made my morning considerably brighter. "Arthur, I have some news about the bail situation." I set down my coffee cup. "Do tell." Jessica made bail, but just barely. Her parents had to mortgage their house to come up with the $50,000. "But Sebastian," he paused dramatically. "Sebastian is still in county lockup. Apparently, none of his friends were willing to put up the $25,000 for his bail bond." A surge of grim satisfaction washed over me. How interesting. And here I thought he had such a strong network of supporters. It gets better. My contact at the DA's office tells me he's not adjusting well to the conditions. He's been complaining about everything from the food to his cellmate. His cellmate? A woman named Rhonda, in for assault. Apparently, Sebastian tried to explain that there had been some kind of mistake, that he didn't belong in there with people like that. I actually laughed out loud. Oh, the irony. He spent so many years looking down on people he considered beneath his social status. I suppose he's getting a crash course in humility. There's something else. He's been asking to make phone calls to you. The jail staff has been told to deny them, I assume on your instruction? Actually, Lawrence corrected, you have the right to accept or refuse calls from inmates. They wanted me to ask what you would prefer. I considered this for a moment. There was a certain dark appeal to letting Sebastian call, to hearing the desperation in his voice, to knowing that he was finally experiencing real consequences. But there was also the risk that hearing his voice might weaken my resolve. No calls, I decided. He had his chance to be my son. He chose money instead. Lawrence cleared his throat. The prosecution has asked if you'd be willing to testify. They want your personal account of what happened the day after the funeral. Of course. When? The trial is scheduled to begin November 15th. Your testimony would likely be on the second day. I marked the date in my calendar. What should I expect? Their defense attorney, a woman named Rebecca Finch, is going to try to paint you as a vindictive stepfather who manipulated a sick old woman into changing her will. Stepfather? I was indignant. I raised that boy from the age of 2 after my wife's first husband died. I changed his diapers, taught him to read, stayed up with him when he had nightmares. I know, Arthur. But they're going to argue that you never legally adopted him, that you were always the outsider looking to secure your financial future. The injustice of it took my breath away. They're going to turn me into the villain. They're going to try. That's why your testimony is so crucial. The jury needs to see you as you really are, a grieving widower who was betrayed by the people he loved most. That evening, I stood in front of my mirror, considering how I would present myself in court. The somber mourning attire I had worn to the funeral wouldn't be appropriate. It would feel too much like playing a role. Instead, I would dress like the dignified man I had always been. Conservative but elegant, expensive but not flashy. I chose a charcoal gray suit with a silk tie, my grandfather's cufflinks, and the simple gold wedding band Eleanor had placed on my finger 37 years ago. My hair would be styled simply, professionally, in a way that suggested competence without vanity. Over the next several weeks, I worked with Lawrence and the prosecutor, a sharp young man named William Hayes, to prepare my testimony. They asked me the same questions over and over until my answers became second nature. Mr. Drake, can you tell us about your relationship with the defendant, Sebastian Cole? I raised him as my own son from the age of 2. His biological father died in a car accident, and his mother and I married when he was still a toddler. He was the center of our world. And how would you describe your wife's relationship with Jessica Cole? Eleanor treated Jessica like the daughter she never had. She brought her into the family business, taught her everything about architecture and project management, and included her in major decisions. Mr. Drake, can you tell the jury about the conversation that took place the day after your wife's funeral? This was the crucial part, the moment where I would need to convey not just the facts, but the emotional devastation of that betrayal. They told me I had no claim to my own home. They said they weren't giving me a dime, that I needed to be out by the next morning. When I tried to reason with them, my son, I always paused here, letting the pain show through. My son told me that his mother had never really loved me, that I was just convenient. How did that make you feel? Like my heart had been ripped out of my chest. Not because of the money Eleanor had left me financially secure regardless of the inheritance, but because the child I had raised was looking at my grief and seeing an opportunity. We practiced until I could deliver these lines with perfect composure, showing just enough emotion to be sympathetic without appearing theatrical. Meanwhile, the media attention continued to build. A true crime blogger had picked up the story, creating a detailed timeline of events that painted me as a wronged man seeking justice. The comment section was filled with support. This man is my hero. Family loyalty should go both ways. I hope he takes them for everything. What kind of monster steals from their own father? He raised that boy from a baby, and this is how he gets repaid? Disgusting. The support was gratifying, but more than that, it was strategic. Public opinion would inevitably influence the jury pool, and having the narrative firmly established in my favor could only help. 2 weeks before the trial, I received an unexpected visitor. I was in my greenhouse tending to my orchids when Susan Peterson appeared at the door. "Arthur, you have a visitor. A young man who says he's a friend of Sebastian's." I looked up from my plants. Did he give a name? Brian something. He seems very nervous. I followed Susan back to the house, where a young man in his early 30s was waiting anxiously in my foyer. He was well-dressed, but had clearly been crying, his eyes red-rimmed and his hands shaking. "Mr. Drake, I'm Brian Miller. I went to college with Sebastian, and we've been friends ever since." I gestured toward the living room. "Please, sit down. Can I offer you something to drink?" "No, thank you. I came to talk to you about Sebastian." "What about him?" Brian twisted his college ring nervously. "He asked me to come. He's desperate, Mr. Drake. He's been in jail for a month now, and he's not doing well." I imagine jail isn't particularly comfortable for someone who has lived such a privileged life. It's not just the conditions, it's the guilt. He knows what he did was wrong. He knows he hurt you terribly. I settled back in my chair, studying this young man who had agreed to plead his friend's case. And what exactly is he asking me to do? He wants you to know that he's sorry. Really, truly sorry. He said if he could take back everything he said that day, he would. But he can't, I replied simply. No, he can't. But he's begging you to find some mercy in your heart. He's begging you not to testify against him. I was quiet for a long moment. Brian, let me ask you something. If someone stole from your family, tried to throw you out of your home, and told you that you weren't worth a dime, would you find mercy in your heart? Brian's eyes filled with tears. I don't know. I hope I would. Well, I don't. Because mercy is something you show to people who make mistakes, not to people who make calculated choices to destroy you. But he's your son. No, I interrupted, my voice firm. A son doesn't do what Sebastian did. A son doesn't look at his father's grief and see dollar signs. I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. He made his choice when he decided money was more important than family. Now he gets to live with that choice. Brian left, and I felt no regret about my decision. If anything, I felt more resolved than ever. The trial couldn't come soon enough. The courthouse was packed on November 15th. I had arrived early, driven by my longtime chauffeur, Thomas, in the black Mercedes that Eleanor had bought for special occasions. I wore my charcoal gray suit and my grandfather's cufflinks, my hair perfectly styled, my composure absolute. The media was out in force. Cameras and reporters lined the courthouse steps, and I could hear the buzz of excitement as I walked past them. This had become the story of the season, the wealthy widower versus his own son, with millions of dollars and family honor at stake. Lawrence met me at the courthouse entrance, resplendent in his best courtroom attire. Ready for this, Arthur? I've been ready since the day they told me I wasn't family, I replied. Inside the courtroom was a study in contrasts. On one side sat the prosecution team, confident, well-prepared, armed with overwhelming evidence. On the other side sat Sebastian and Jessica with their defense attorney, Rebecca Finch, a middle-aged woman with steel-gray hair and the kind of aggressive posture that suggested she planned to fight every charge. I hadn't seen my son in person since that terrible confrontation in my living room 6 weeks ago. He looked thin, worn down by his time in jail. His styled hair had lost its salon shine, and his orange prison jumpsuit was a far cry from the designer clothes he usually favored. When he saw me enter the courtroom, his eyes filled with tears, and he mouthed the word, "Please." I looked right through him and took my seat behind the prosecution table. Jury selection had taken place the previous week, and Lawrence had kept me informed. The final jury was composed of 8 women and 4 men, ranging in age from their 30s to their 70s. Several were parents, 3 were grandparents, and most came from middle-class backgrounds, exactly the demographic that would understand both family loyalty and the devastating impact of betrayal. Judge Eleanor Vance called the court to order. At 58, she was known for running a tight courtroom and having little patience for dramatics. She was also known for her fairness and her particular intolerance for crimes that targeted the elderly. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Prosecutor William Hayes began his opening statement. This case is about trust. The trust between a husband and wife, the trust between a parent and child, the trust between a woman and her daughter-in-law, and it's about what happens when that trust is betrayed in the most calculating and cruel way possible. He painted a picture of Eleanor as a successful architect who had worked tirelessly to build a legacy for her family, only to discover that those closest to her were systematically stealing from her. He described my role as the loyal husband who had supported his wife through 37 years of marriage, only to be told by my own son that I was worthless. The evidence will show, Hayes continued, that Jessica Cole embezzled over $200,000 from her mother-in-law's firm, that she forged signatures, diverted payments, and used her position of trust to line her own pockets while gambling away her family's financial security. He turned to address Sebastian directly, and the evidence will show that Sebastian Cole, rather than supporting his grieving father, chose to participate in a scheme to defraud Mr. Drake of his rightful inheritance. They planned to throw an elderly widower out of his own home and leave him with nothing more than the clothes on his back. The jury was listening intently, several of them glancing toward Sebastian with expressions of disgust. Then it was Rebecca Finch's turn. She stood slowly, dramatically, and walked toward the jury with the confident stride of someone who believed she could rewrite the narrative. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is indeed about trust, but it's also about greed. The greed of a man who saw an opportunity to manipulate a sick, elderly woman into leaving him everything, cutting out her only biological child in the process. I felt my jaw clench, but kept my expression neutral. Arthur Drake was Eleanor Drake's second husband, Finch continued. He never legally adopted Sebastian. He never took on the financial or legal responsibilities of parenthood, yet now he claims the emotional authority of a biological father when it suits his purposes. She painted me as a calculating stepfather who had slowly poisoned Eleanor's relationship with her son, who had manipulated her during her illness to change her will in his favor. According to her version, Jessica's taking money from the company wasn't theft. It was legitimate compensation that Eleanor had approved but failed to document properly. The real question, she concluded, is why a man who claims to love his stepson would send him to prison rather than work out a family solution to what amounts to a misunderstanding about inheritance and business finances. The opening statement set the battle lines clearly. This would be a war not just over facts, but over narrative. Who was the victim? Who was the villain? And what constituted justice versus revenge? The prosecution began presenting their case, starting with the financial evidence. Bank records were entered into evidence showing the systematic diversion of funds from Drake Architecture accounts into Jessica's personal accounts. Forged signatures were highlighted, with handwriting experts testifying to the deliberate nature of the fraud. The private investigator, Peter Vance, took the stand to describe his months of surveillance and documentation. He presented photographs of Jessica at the Mohegan Sun Casino, losing thousands of dollars while her company paychecks sat undeposited. He detailed the pattern of theft that had accelerated in the months before Eleanor's death. Miss Cole knew her mother-in-law was ill, the investigator testified. She seemed to be rushing to take as much as possible before the situation was discovered. Jessica's former secretary from Drake Architecture, Carol Jenkins, testified about suspicious transactions she had been asked to process, about Jessica's nervousness when certain clients called about missing payments, about finding her in Eleanor's office after hours, going through confidential files. I tried to tell Mrs. Drake about some of the things I was seeing, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. She was such a good woman, so trusting. She kept saying Jessica was family, that there must be an explanation. By the end of the first day, the prosecution had established a clear pattern of embezzlement that was impossible to deny. Jessica sat at the defense table looking increasingly pale, while Sebastian seemed to be trying to physically distance himself from his wife's actions. That evening, I sat in my study with a glass of wine, reviewing the day's testimony with Lawrence. "How do you think it went?" I asked. "Very well. The evidence is overwhelming, and the jury is clearly sympathetic to your situation." He paused. "Tomorrow is when you testify. Are you ready?" I looked at the family photo on Eleanor's desk, the three of us at Sebastian's college graduation. All of us smiling, all of us believing we had many more happy years ahead of us. "I'm ready," I said. "It's time to tell the truth." I woke at 5 a.m. On the morning I was scheduled to testify, though I had hardly slept. It wasn't from nervousness I had been anticipating this moment for weeks, but rather from a sense of solemn purpose. Today, I would finally have the chance to tell my story, in my own words, under oath, with Sebastian forced to listen to every single syllable. I took extra care with my appearance, choosing a navy blue suit that Eleanor had always said made me look dignified and authoritative. My silver hair was perfectly styled. My grandfather's cufflinks gleamed softly at my wrists, and my makeup was flawless but understated. I would look exactly like what I was, a man of substance who had been wronged by his own family. Lawrence picked me up at 8:30, and we drove to the courthouse in a comfortable silence. The media circus had only intensified. There were now 3 news vans, and at least a dozen reporters waiting on the courthouse steps. "Mr. Drake! Mr. Drake!" they called as I walked past. "How are you feeling about testifying against your own son?" I paused and turned to face them, allowing the cameras to capture my composed, resolute expression. "I'm feeling that justice needs to be served, regardless of family relationships. Do you have any regrets about pressing charges?" "My only regret," I said clearly, my voice carrying over the din, "is that I raised a son who could look at his father's grief and see an opportunity." Inside the courtroom, I took my place behind the prosecution table, acutely aware of Sebastian's eyes on me. He had been brought from jail early that morning, and he looked even worse than he had the previous day. His skin was pale, his hair limp, and his orange jumpsuit seemed to hang on his diminished frame. When my name was called, I walked to the witness stand with steady, measured steps. The bailiff asked me to raise my right hand. "Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God?" "I do," I said clearly, looking directly at the jury. Prosecutor Hayes approached the stand. "Please state your name for the record." "Arthur Elizabeth Drake." "Mr. Drake, how long were you married to Eleanor Drake?" 37 years. We married in 1987, when her son Sebastian was 2 years old. Can you tell us about your relationship with Sebastian during those years?" I turned slightly toward the jury, making eye contact with several of them. "I raised him as my own son. His biological father had died in a car accident, and Eleanor was struggling to balance single parenthood with building her business. I loved that little boy from the moment I met him." "Did you legally adopt Sebastian?" "No, though not for lack of trying. Eleanor felt it was important for him to keep his father's name as a connection to his biological heritage. But in every way that mattered, I was his father. I taught him to read, helped with his homework, stayed up all night when he had the flu. I planned his birthday parties, taught him to drive, helped him choose his wedding suit." Several jurors were nodding, and I could see the sympathy in their eyes. "Mr. Drake, can you tell us about the day after your wife's funeral?" This was the moment I had been preparing for. I took a deep breath and let the genuine pain show in my voice. I was exhausted from the funeral and the reception. It had been a long, emotional day, and I was looking forward to some quiet time to process my grief. But Sebastian and Jessica cornered me in my own living room and told me they needed to talk about the estate. "What did they tell you?" "They said everything belonged to Sebastian now. The house, the business, all of Eleanor's investments, everything. They said I had no legal claim to any of it." "How did that make you feel?" "Shocked, devastated. Not because of the money, but because of the sheer callousness. My wife had been buried less than 24 hours earlier, and they were already dividing up her possessions." "What happened next?" "They told me I needed to be out of the house by the next morning." Jessica said, I paused, looking directly at her. She said, "We're not giving you a dime. We own everything now." And how did your son respond to this? This was the moment that would damn Sebastian in the eyes of the jury, and I delivered it with perfect, pained composure. He told me that his mother had never really loved me, that I was just convenient. He said the house was meant for him and Jessica, that they had plans to renovate and modernize it. I looked directly at Sebastian. He said I had to accept that I wasn't really part of the family. Several jurors looked shocked. One elderly woman actually gasped. "Mr. Drake, what was your response to this?" I was too stunned to respond effectively, but I remember thinking that the son I had raised would never speak to anyone that way, much less his own father. Hayes walked me through the rest of the testimony. Lawrence's arrival with Eleanor's real will, the discovery of the embezzlement evidence, the realization that my wife had been protecting me even from beyond the grave. "Mr. Drake, why did you decide to press criminal charges rather than try to resolve this within the family?" I considered the question carefully. Because what they did wasn't a family dispute, it was a crime. Jessica stole over $200,000 from my wife's business. They conspired to defraud me of my inheritance. They planned to make me homeless. Those aren't family problems. They're criminal acts. Do you have any regrets about your decision? None whatsoever. I believe in accountability. I believe that actions have consequences. And I believe that being related to someone doesn't give you the right to steal from them. Then it was Rebecca Finch's turn for cross-examination. She stood slowly, like a predator sizing up her prey. "Mr. Drake, isn't it true that you never legally adopted Sebastian Cole?" "That's correct, though, as I explained. Just yes or no, please. You never legally adopted him, correct?" "Correct." "And isn't it true that in the months before your wife's death, you had significant influence over her medical care and daily routine?" "I was her husband and primary caregiver." "Yes." "Isn't it true that you had multiple private meetings with her attorney during that time?" "We met to discuss estate planning, yes." "Estate planning that resulted in you inheriting everything and her biological son inheriting nothing?" I felt my temper rising but kept my voice level. "Estate planning that protected me from exactly what happened, her son trying to steal my home and leave me destitute." "Mr. Drake, isn't it possible that your wife was not of sound mind when she changed her will? She was on multiple medications, suffering from a terminal illness. My wife was sharp as a tack until the day she died," I said firmly. "She changed her will because she discovered that Jessica was stealing from her company and that they were planning to betray me, or because you manipulated a sick, elderly woman into cutting out her own child." "Objection." Prosecutor Hayes stood, argumentative. "Sustained," Judge Vance ruled. Finch tried several more approaches, attempting to paint me as a manipulative stepfather, questioning my motives, suggesting that I was motivated by greed rather than justice. But she had no evidence to support any of her theories, and I had the profound advantage of being completely truthful. After 45 minutes of fruitless cross-examination, she finally gave up. No further questions. As I stepped down from the witness stand, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. I had told my story, under oath, in front of a jury and a packed courtroom. I had looked my son in the eye and described exactly what he had done to me, and I had done it all with dignity and composure. The rest of the prosecution's case moved quickly. Character witnesses testified about my reputation in the community, about the kind of stepfather I had been to Sebastian. Eleanor's doctor testified that my wife had been mentally sharp until her death, fully capable of making legal decisions. By Friday afternoon, the prosecution rested their case. Judge Vance looked at the defense table. "Miss Finch, are you prepared to present your case?" Patricia Kellerman stood. "Your Honor, at this time the defense calls Sebastian Cole to the stand." This would be interesting. I had been wondering whether Sebastian would testify on his own behalf, and apparently he had decided to take the risk. As my son walked to the witness stand in his orange jumpsuit, I felt no paternal sympathy, no urge to protect him from what was coming. He had made his choices. Now he would face the consequences, under oath, just as I had. Watching Sebastian testify was like watching a stranger wear my son's face. He sat in the witness chair, his hands folded demurely in his lap, trying to project an image of remorse and victimhood that might have worked if I hadn't known him so well. Rebecca Finch began with softball questions, establishing Sebastian's version of events. According to my son's testimony, he had genuinely believed that his mother's original will was valid. He claimed that Jessica's financial dealings with the company were legitimate business transactions that had been misinterpreted. Most importantly, he painted himself as a son who had been trying to protect his rightful inheritance from a stepfather who had manipulated his dying mother. "I loved my mom," Sebastian said, tears streaming down his face. "Everything I did was because I thought it's what she would have wanted. I thought the house should stay in the Drake bloodline. It was a performance worthy of a soap opera, complete with strategic pauses and calculated emotion. But I could see the jury wasn't buying it. They had heard too much evidence, seen too many documents, and listened to too many witnesses who painted a very different picture." Then came the cross-examination. Prosecutor Hayes approached the witness stand like a shark scenting blood. "Mr. Cole, you testified that you believed your mother's original will was valid, correct?" "Yes. And yet you never asked to see the will before confronting Mr. Drake, did you?" Sebastian hesitated. Jessica had already seen it. "That's not what I asked. You personally never requested to see the legal document you were basing your entire claim on, correct?" "No, but..." "And when Mr. Drake was presented with the newer will, did you ask to examine it? Did you request verification from the attorney?" "We were in shock." "Mr. Cole, please answer the question. Did you ask to verify the document?" "No. Instead, you accused Mr. Drake of manipulating your mother. Isn't that right?" "I was emotional. You were angry that your plan to inherit everything had been thwarted, weren't you?" "Objection." Finch stood, argumentative. "I'll rephrase," Hayes said smoothly. "Mr. Cole, when you told Mr. Drake he needed to leave the house by the next morning, were you concerned about his welfare? About where an elderly man would go with no notice?" Sebastian's composure was cracking. We thought he had other options." "What other options?" "You were telling him he would inherit nothing. No money, no property, no support. Where exactly did you think he would go?" "I don't know," Sebastian whispered. "You don't know because you didn't care, did you? You were so focused on what you thought you were inheriting that you didn't give a single thought to what would happen to the man who raised you." The tears were flowing freely now, but they looked different than before, less theatrical, more genuinely distressed. "And when you told Mr. Drake that your mother had never really loved him, that he was just convenient, those were your words, weren't they?" Sebastian couldn't speak. He just nodded. "Mr. Cole, I need you to answer audibly for the record." "Yes," he whispered. "But I didn't mean..." "You didn't mean to devastate a grieving widower? You didn't mean to attack the man who had sacrificed to raise you as his own child?" "I was angry." "You were cruel," Hayes said flatly. "And that cruelty, combined with your wife's theft and your attempt to defraud Mr. Drake of his inheritance, is why we're here today." By the time Hayes finished with him, Sebastian was a wreck. He had admitted to most of the key facts of the case, destroyed his own credibility, and shown the jury exactly the kind of person he really was. Jessica's testimony was even worse. She tried to claim that her financial dealings with Drake Architecture had been authorized by Eleanor, but the prosecutor demolished her with bank records and witness testimony. When confronted with evidence of her gambling debts and the systematic nature of her theft, she broke down completely. "I never meant for it to go so far," she sobbed. "I thought I could pay it back before anyone noticed. I thought Eleanor would understand." "Understand what?" Hayes pressed. "That you were stealing from the woman who had treated you like a daughter? I had debts. The casino. I thought I could win it back." It was pathetic, really. This woman, who had swaggered into my living room 6 weeks ago, so confident in her right to steal from me, was now reduced to sniveling excuses about gambling, addiction, and financial pressure. The defense case collapsed within 2 days. Finch had no credible witnesses, no evidence to support her theory of manipulation. Nothing but desperate attempts to paint me as the villain in a story where the facts clearly identified the real criminals. During closing arguments, Hayes summarized the evidence methodically, building an unshakable case for conviction on all charges. He reminded the jury of my testimony, of the pain in my voice when I described my son's betrayal, of the overwhelming evidence of Jessica's theft. "Ladies and gentlemen," he concluded, "this case is about more than money. It's about the most fundamental bonds of trust between parent and child, between family members, between people who are supposed to love and protect each other. The defendants didn't just steal money, they stole from the very heart of what family is supposed to mean." Finch's closing argument was a desperate attempt to resurrect her manipulation theory, but it fell flat. The jury had seen the evidence, heard the testimony, and made up their minds. Judge Vance gave the jury their instructions at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. They deliberated for exactly 3 hours. I was in Lawrence's office when the call came. "Mr. Drake," his secretary said, "the court clerk just called. The jury has reached a verdict." My heart was pounding as we drove back to the courthouse. The media circus had intensified. Word had gotten out that a verdict was coming, and the courthouse steps were packed with reporters and cameras. Inside, the courtroom was electric with tension. Sebastian and Jessica sat at the defense table, both looking like they might be sick. When I entered, Sebastian turned to look at me one last time, his eyes pleading for some sign of mercy or forgiveness. I looked right through him and took my seat. Judge Vance called the court to order. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" The jury foreman, a retired teacher in her 60s, stood up. "We have, Your Honor, on the charge of embezzlement in the first degree against Jessica Cole. How do you find?" "Guilty, Your Honor." Jessica's legs buckled and she had to grab the defense table for support. "On the charge of wire fraud against Jessica Cole, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the charge of conspiracy to commit inheritance fraud against Jessica Cole, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the charge of conspiracy to commit inheritance fraud against Sebastian Cole, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the charge of attempted elderly financial abuse against Sebastian Cole, how do you find?" "Guilty." Sebastian was sobbing now, his face buried in his hands. But I felt only a deep, profound satisfaction. Justice had been served. Judge Vance set sentencing for the following month, then dismissed the jury with thanks for their service. Several jurors looked at me sympathetically as they filed out, and one elderly gentleman actually nodded his approval. As the bailiffs prepared to escort Sebastian and Jessica back to jail, my son turned to me one last time. "Dad, please," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I stood up, smoothed my suit jacket, and walked past him without a word. Some apologies come too late. Some betrayals cut too deep. Some choices have consequences that last forever. Outside the courthouse, the media was waiting. "Mr. Drake, how do you feel about the verdicts?" I paused at the top of the steps, looking out at the crowd of reporters and cameras. Behind me was a courthouse, where justice had just been served. Ahead of me was the rest of my life. "I feel," I said clearly, that accountability matters, that family loyalty should go both ways, and that no one, no matter who they are to you, has the right to steal from you and expect to get away with it. Do you have any message for your son? I considered the question carefully. I have no son, I said finally. I had a son once, but he died the day he told me I wasn't family. Sentencing day arrived on a cold December morning. I wore my black wool coat and my best cufflinks, the ones Eleanor had given me for our 20th anniversary. As I walked into the courthouse for what I knew would be the final chapter of this ordeal, I felt a sense of completion that had been missing from my life since Eleanor's death. The courtroom was packed again, but this time the energy was different. The trial was over, the verdicts were in, and now it was time for Judge Vance to decide how much prison time my son and his wife would serve for their crimes. I took my usual seat behind the prosecution table and waited. Jessica was brought in first, wearing an ill-fitting suit that her lawyer had probably borrowed for the occasion. 6 weeks in jail had aged her considerably. Her hair was dull, her face gaunt, and her eyes held the hollow look of a woman who had finally understood the full scope of her mistakes. Then came Sebastian. My heart should have broken seeing my son in his orange jumpsuit, shackled and pale, but instead, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. He had made his choices, and now he would face the consequences. Judge Vance called the court to order. We're here today for sentencing in the matter of the state versus Jessica Cole and Sebastian Cole. Before I impose sentence, I'll hear from the victims. Prosecutor Hayes nodded to me. Your Honor, Mr. Drake would like to make a victim impact statement. I rose and walked to the podium, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on me. This would be my final word on the matter. My last chance to speak directly to the people who had tried to destroy me. Your Honor, my name is Arthur Drake, and I am the victim of these defendants' crimes. My voice was strong, clear, carrying easily to every corner of the courtroom, but I want to be very clear about what they stole from me. It wasn't just money, though they tried to steal that too. It wasn't just my home, though they planned to take that as well. I looked directly at Sebastian, who was crying quietly at the defense table. What they stole was my faith in family. What they stole was my belief that the child I had raised, the son I had loved unconditionally for 36 years, would never look at my grief and see an opportunity. Several people in the courtroom were wiping their eyes, but I continued without emotion. Jessica Cole stole over $200,000 from my late wife's business. But more than that, she stole my wife's trust. Eleanor Drake treated this woman like a daughter, and Jessica repaid that love with theft and betrayal. I turned to look at Jessica, who couldn't meet my eyes. Sebastian Cole conspired to defraud me of my inheritance and leave me homeless. But more than that, he killed the father-son relationship I had treasured for decades. He told me I wasn't family, that his mother had never loved me, that I was just convenient. Those words can never be taken back. My voice grew stronger, more forceful. Your Honor, I ask for the maximum sentence allowed by law. Not because I'm vindictive, but because accountability matters, because actions must have consequences, because the next elderly person these defendants encounter deserves to be protected from their cruelty and greed. I returned to my seat feeling lighter than I had in months. Judge Vance then heard from the defense attorneys, who made predictable pleas for mercy, talked about remorse and rehabilitation, and promised that their clients had learned their lesson. Finally, she asked the defendants if they wanted to make statements before sentencing. Jessica stood first, her voice shaking. Your Honor, I know what I did was wrong. I stole from a woman who had been like a mother to me, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. I was gambling, I was desperate, and I made terrible choices. I'm sorry. and I'm ready to face the consequences. Then it was Sebastian's turn. He stood slowly, his orange jumpsuit wrinkled, his face streaked with tears. "Your Honor, I know I hurt my father terribly. I said things I can never take back, and I participated in something that was deeply wrong." He turned to look at me. "Dad, I know you probably can't forgive me, but I want you to know that I love you. I've always loved you. And I'm so sorry I forgot that when it mattered most." I looked at him steadily, feeling nothing. Love was action, not words, and his actions had spoken louder than any apology ever could. Judge Vance reviewed the sentencing guidelines, considered the evidence, and rendered her decision. "Miss Cole, you have been convicted of embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The evidence shows a systematic pattern of theft from your mother-in-law's business, motivated by gambling addiction and personal greed. You violated the trust of a woman who had welcomed you into her family and given you opportunities you hadn't earned." She paused, looking directly at her. "I sentence you to 8 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 5 years. You are also ordered to make full restitution of the $200,000 you stole, plus interest and penalties." Jessica collapsed back into her chair, the weight of 8 years hitting her like a physical blow. "Mr. Cole, you have been convicted of conspiracy and attempted elderly financial abuse. While you were not directly involved in the embezzlement, your participation in the scheme to defraud your stepfather was equally reprehensible. You targeted an elderly widower in his time of grief and tried to leave him homeless and destitute." Judge Vance's voice grew stern. "What makes your crime particularly heinous is the family relationship. Mr. Drake raised you from the age of 2. Loved you as his own child, and your response to his generosity was to betray him in the most cruel way possible." Sebastian was sobbing openly now. "I sentence you to 4 years in state prison, with a possibility of parole after 2 years. You are prohibited from contacting Mr. Drake, directly or indirectly, for the duration of your sentence and for 5 years following your release." The bailiffs moved forward to escort them back to jail. But before they could, Sebastian broke away and turned toward me one last time. "Dad, please." "Sir, you need to come with us now," the bailiff said firmly, taking his arm. As they led him away, he looked back over his shoulder, his eyes desperate and pleading. But I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, my expression serene. I had no son. Not anymore. After the courthouse emptied, I sat alone in my Mercedes as Thomas waited patiently behind the wheel. The December sky was gray and overcast, matching my mood perfectly. Justice had been served, but justice was cold comfort when it came at the cost of family. "Where to, Mr. Drake?" Thomas asked gently. "Home?" I said. "Just home." The drive took us through the Connecticut countryside I had loved for 30 years, past the covered bridges and stone walls that had witnessed the rise and fall of the Drake family legacy. As we turned into my circular driveway, I looked up at the house that Eleanor and I had built together, the home that Sebastian and Jessica had tried to steal from me. It was mine now, completely and legally. 12 acres of pristine land, a mansion filled with antiques and memories, and enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life. I had won. So why did victory taste so bitter? Over the next few months, I settled into my new reality. The media attention gradually faded, though the story occasionally resurfaced in true crime documentaries and legal blogs. I was always portrayed sympathetically, the dignified widower who had sought justice against his own family. I donated Eleanor's architectural firm to her longtime employees who had been loyal to her and deserved to benefit from their years of service. The $200,000 that Jessica would likely never be able to repay came out of Sebastian's eventual inheritance, which meant he would leave prison with nothing but the clothes on his back, just as he had planned for me. I redecorated the house, erasing every trace of Sebastian and Jessica from my home. I hired new staff, planted new gardens, and created new routines that belonged only to me. I traveled to Europe, visited old friends, and slowly built a life that didn't include the son who had betrayed me. But late at night, in the profound silence of my grand house, I sometimes found myself wondering if I had chosen justice or revenge, if I had done what was right or simply what felt satisfying. 6 months after the sentencing, I received a letter forwarded through Lawrence's office. It was from Sebastian, written on prison stationery in the careful cursive I had taught him as a child. "Dear Dad," it began, "I know you probably won't read this, but I had to try. I think about that day every single moment I'm awake. I think about the look on your face when I told you Mom never loved you and I want to die from shame. I was wrong about everything. Wrong about the money. Wrong about what family means. Wrong about who you are and what you meant to Mom and me." The letter went on for pages, detailing his regrets, his insights about his mistakes, his desperate hope that someday I might find it in my heart to forgive him. I read it twice, then carried it to the fireplace in Eleanor's study and watched it burn. Some bridges, once destroyed, can never be rebuilt. Some words, once spoken, can never be forgotten. Some betrayals cut so deep that forgiveness becomes impossible, not because the victim is unforgiving, but because the wound has fundamentally changed who they are. A year later, I was tending my roses when Susan Peterson brought me the news that Sebastian had been released early for good behavior. "He's back in town," Susan said gently, "living in a small apartment downtown, working at that new restaurant on Main Street." I continued pruning my roses, my shears making clean, precise cuts. "How nice for him? Arthur, he's been asking about you, wondering if you might be willing to see him." I looked up at my oldest friend, seeing the deep concern in her eyes. Susan had been through this entire ordeal with me, had supported my decisions even when she didn't fully understand them. "And what did you tell him?" I told him that some things can't be fixed with time and good intentions. I nodded and went back to my roses. They were beautiful this year, full and fragrant, the result of careful tending and ruthless pruning. Sometimes you had to cut away the diseased parts to save the whole plant. That evening, I sat in my garden with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The house behind me was perfect. The gardens around me were flourishing, and my bank account was more than adequate for anything I might need. I had everything I had fought for. I was safe, secure, and vindicated. But I was also alone. As the first stars began to appear in the twilight sky, I raised my glass in a silent toast to Eleanor. "I kept my promise, my love," I whispered to the gathering darkness. "I didn't let them win. I didn't let them convince me I was worthless. I fought back, and I won." If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.